Good morning, everybody, and hello to everyone watching live stream. It's early. I hope you're drinking coffee. I'm drinking some right now. I wanted to put in a plug for two of our programs that are coming up this summer after this one. July 13th, we have a program called Creating a Pitch Deck, kind of more geared to small business, but you can also use it in your nonprofit work. And then August 4th, we are having another Find It, Fund It, and that's always pretty popular. Just kind of getting people acquainted with our Nonprofit Resource Center database, all those online resources that you can use only in the library. I think you can still get on the kind of low-tech version at home, but all the really good stuff is on the one that's in-house. So we're doing that August 4th. And Patty is presenting today, Patty Sullivan. She has worked a lot with us, thank goodness. She's wonderful. She is the Executive Director of the Ozark Literacy Council since June of 2017. She's a very experienced grant writer and fundraiser, usually focusing on access to healthcare and education. She's a member of the Rotary Club of Fayetteville, the Arkansas chapter of Grant Professionals Association, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and her passion mainly is the mission of Ozark Literacy Council, working to ensure that all people possess the literacy and the community building skills that they need to really fully contribute to society and connect with the rest of the world so they are taken care of and they can take care of other people. So enjoy the program today. It's a popular one.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to start right now, and they assure me, they're live streaming, they assure me that they're okay with me wandering a little bit, that I don't have to be tied to the podium. But the thing that's most interesting to me is who you all are working with, or why you're here today. Because I can tailor, as we talk, I can tailor a little bit. I've already had a terrific conversation with one nonprofit executive director even before the meeting and gotten some good ideas. So I'll start by letting Katie introduce herself. She works with me. So.
Hi, I'm Katie Theriot. I work at Ozark Literacy Council as the Communications and Outreach Manager.
So she's a digital storyteller. She's a lot of digital storytelling. And also is wonderful at coming up with creative concepts, because we were a little low on content when we were closed to, when we were only virtual for a year, because we usually have all these wonderful adult, immigrant, and refugee literacy students in the building, and there's everybody in our building has an amazing story, but Katie was really adept at finding those stories in other ways when we were virtual. So, and Nikita.
Hi, I'm Nikita. I'm an intern this summer for Ozark Literacy Council, and I'm a University of Arkansas student.
We've already discovered that she's good at the mysteries of Excel. She's going into her junior year in accounting. Yes, and is our United Way Tyson summer intern. Some of your programs may have applied. United Way Tyson, this is the 5th year. And I always like tease Nikita, the last two interns, one's off to Harvard for grad school and the other one's at Brown. So, what can I say? That United Way Tyson program, is anybody involved? Anybody using that? So it's an easy summertime grant. The stipend for the student is $4,200 for 8 weeks work, which is, I think, a good, significant summer job. And so they usually have about 22 spaces in the Fayetteville, in Northwest Arkansas, and also in Fort Smith. They have a few more in Fort Smith. So thank you, Nikita. And what is your name?
Hi, I'm Karen Johnson from Eureka Springs.
Very good.
And I have a friend coming too. And I've had a dream. I have horses and paid for 3 acres commercial, connecting to 40. And anyway, I'm hoping to do a horse therapy thing.
Interesting.
And reading, I used to teach Ozark guidance. And Mr. Colbert told me to go get your teacher's license. And
he tells people things to do.
Yeah.
He's good at that.
Aided in his school. And anyway, so
That's wonderful, and horse therapy and reading and all of those are such positive things. So, and Kelly, I will say, I've already told at least one person today that Kelly is the fundraising, she handles the nonprofit collection for the Fayetteville Public Library. I've been coming in here for years because they have the foundation directory. She was talking about that Find It, Fund It. They own this really expensive database that helps you. Has anybody done research in Foundation Directory yet? If the U of A has others. They have it, but they have a couple of others too that are more focused on government research and things. But this one is a treasure trove. It does require a little bit of learning, but I've been using it steady on as a grant writer for over, I guess 10 years. Right, it's gotten better over the years, hadn't it? It gives you lots of information, and the best part is you can email the information to yourself or to people on your team. So there's not, like you can just pull a record, and it might give you, it'll find out if the foundation, if the organization you're interested in funds in Arkansas, if they have a history of funding in the kind of work that you do. For her, she might look for something to do with horse therapy. I mean, that's an entire field. And so she might find an organization that's not in Arkansas, but is very interested in the work. And then you have this compelling story of doing this in beautiful Eureka Springs area and and the compelling need of Carroll County, right? So we know the literacy numbers there are staggering. So and we'll start back here.
I'm Christina Williams. I'm the Executive Director of Circles NWA.
Oh, Jacob Arnold and I were just communicating about you. He's one of my board members, yeah. So.
So we're a nonprofit. The Circles model is a national model. We've brought a chapter of it here, but we're focused on helping low-income families connect to people across income lines, build social capital, social support as an effort to pursue upward mobility.
Wonderful. And she's been in touch with the Ozark Literacy Council. Our values and the work we do is bridging and belonging for adult immigrants and refugees, which is more than literacy. It's about, incorporating into the community, and Circles is working in this same circle. And so you'll be hearing from our program director. So wonderful. And
Jane Ray, I'm the Executive Director of Olivia's Basket, and we primarily focus on building homes for families that are in desperate need. And we've been doing that for quite a while. We've built at least 26 homes so far, and hoping to do one more.
you have to mention the women-led build. I think this is so cool. Okay.
So, I don't know if anybody's an expansion here, but a few years ago I started primarily women-led builds. And we call ourselves Las Chulas, which means, like, if you say, ready, this is fine for a second. If you say, like, Las Chulas, it kind of means like a cute girl or pretty girl, but if you like Las Chulas, it kind of means like hot chick. So I'm so okay with doing both of those. But these are all women house build. Last build, we had 24 women. We always build for a single mom.
Wonderful.
So, life-changing for everybody involved.
Fascinating. We'll go back over here.
I just kind of volunteer. Right now, I'm working with Faith in Action. For
Wonderful.
seniors. And eventually I may do I used to be a foster parent.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And grants are such an important part of everybody's toolbox when they're doing volunteer work and community work. And you?
I'm Jody Hall. I'm with Girls on the Run in Northwest Arkansas.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Girls on the Run is a great. And y'all have been in business here for a while now, I think. That's so. I remember because I had a daughter in elementary school in that time frame, and you all were working with lots of the schools. It's a great mission.
I feel like I had an odd duck out. My name is Nicole Sharp. I'm the sales director at DecoPack. We're the world's largest supplier of cake decorating supplies.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I have the pleasure of leading the sales go-to-market and design strategy for our two biggest clients, Walmart and Sam's Club. And I'm really interested in grant writing so I can use my skills in analysis and meaningful storytelling as a way to engage in some social activism. So
no, that's not odd duck. That's not odd duck. Right now, all the fundraisers in the room have zeroed in on you. It's like, but it's not, because we're all doing storytelling, and we're all fitting that into another way to raise funds for things that we're doing that we care about. And so that's not. And yeah, we actually will go through the. We will go through the checklist kind of grants and what buckets things fit in.
My name is Cassie Taylor, and I am the new annual fund and grants manager at Single Parent Scholarship Fund.
Wonderful.
in Northwest Arkansas.
Wonderful. Single Parent Scholarship Fund, which is a regional organization now. Tyler Clark, a longtime friend of mine, we did work at Community Clinic. Northwest Arkansas is still very much a small town, and a lot of us intersect in so many ways. But so you're doing annual fund and
Grants.
very good. are you all based in Bentonville?
We're in Bentonville,
Okay.
and we cover Washington, Carroll, Madison, and Benton counties.
Wonderful.
Single parent scholarships, but it's not just scholarships to send them back to school. It provides financial assistance that they can use for childcare, groceries, gas, whatever they need. It's obviously single parents, does not have to be a woman, or it can be a man as well. So it's not just giving them the money, but we have programs to build them up and provide them the necessary tools to be successful. And obviously all of our women are in low-income families, and to provide them with the tools to upward move to better paying jobs after graduation.
They also have a terrific alumni network, and one of the things I admire about Single Parent, which is an older and very well-established nonprofit, is they do a good job of respectful storytelling with their clients, and that's a tricky thing to do. Doesn't apply as much in grants as it does fundraising, but I'm very passionate about community-centric fundraising, which means we are helping each other. We're helping each other. We're one community, and Single Parent does a really nice job of storytelling in that way, and having their alumni tell their stories, which is beautiful. So.
My name is Olivia. I'm the newest director of Girls on
Very
One.
good.
So this, I'm a social worker by trade / therapist. So this is just a continuing education for me.
You must have done, did you, in social work, in grad school, did you do some grant writing instruction a little bit?
But we were also, it was the pandemic.
Oh.
So
Sure everything was normal, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
right, and on Zoom, and so the experience, it was different.
Social workers are one of the graduate programs that I know just from my grant writing experience that do get some instruction in grant writing. One of the few, actually, that get some instruction in grant writing. And you?
I'm Savannah Goins. I am the development coordinator for Girls on
Very
One.
good.
I'm brand new. This is my first week. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we're going to talk about one just little portion of what you do. All the, grants are just part. You want a mixed income stream for your nonprofit. You want to have a lot of tools in the box. So there should be some individual giving. She talks about an annual fund. There should also be some grants, and there should perhaps events. Events are the least. As far as the return on investment, events are they're important for fundraising, but they're not the primary way to fundraise for most organizations. We saw that loud and clear when events didn't happen for a while, but they're all important because things change, I've been leading an organization that was completely adult immigrants prior to COVID, but immigration, the work we do in education and adult literacy is very impacted by geopolitics. So the number of immigrants went way, way down. Now we're back with more adult students, but 30% of them are refugees. It's marvelous and wonderful work, but there's a big difference between someone who chose to move here in whatever circumstances and someone who was ripped from their country and ended up, it's very different kind of work. And we have students now with a lower level of literacy, particularly women who may not have had opportunities for education. So everything's moving. So everything that we do is always moving. And that's true for all of you all as well. So, and next.
I'm with a relatively new nonprofit. It's called Growing and Coping Together. And right now I'm basically a volunteer.
Wonderful.
Working with the founders.
And where are you based? Or where are you all working?
Well, it's really based out of Washington County.
Okay.
That's where the founder lives.
Okay, well there you go.
But, we'll also help people in Benton County as well.
There you go. Andy.
Hello, I'm Michelle Akers. I'm with Springwood Behavioral Health.
Oh, very good.
I'm the director of contracts and health information there. But this is more personal.
You're interested in and this is actually, and I'm going to talk about that first because very few folks go to school thinking, I'm going to be a grant writer. It just is, and I actually had people come to me and say, how did you get into that? And I'm actually going to tell you how I got into that, because it wasn't through actual training. I will say that most academics have at least a passing knowledge, particularly faculty members at universities have encountered grants. Many of them are writers as well. I still call grants for people that are like giant term papers with deadlines and checklists. They're just like so if you did a term paper or whatever you call it, you know, a papers when you were in school, this is very similar. And so although it's intimidating, just like some of those term paper assignments we may have gotten as young people, if you just start chunking it down, you see, okay, oh, it's due then. They need this, they need this. The bigger thing, it's a little different than term papers, is it may require that for you to get outside information from other agencies, and that can take longer than looking it up. Right? If you need a letter of support from another organization or you need to partner with somebody, it might be a year in the making, and that's okay too. So you wouldn't want to do the grant necessarily. And I will say, this is not in the presentation, but I never turn a grant in the day it's due. I always turn it in the day before, at the latest. I don't usually turn it in before that because I've been in enough grant submission situations that stuff happens, you know, stuff happens. And so if you've got a big thing, and if you've got a big deadline, you're waiting until the last day, it's better just to turn it in and give yourself 24 hours for when the inevitable chaos of electronic communication, because stuff happens, right? Not just technology, but our own lives now. You know, every week we're in some kind of new situation. So let me find the clicker. I'll go back up here for a minute. And I'm moving gingerly. I broke one of my toes. But it's okay. You know, it's like I'm not in a boot, but you understand, so I'm kind of moving gingerly. So here's how I became a grant writer. I have a BS in communication. I have a master's in English from the University of Louisiana in Lafayette. Spent much of my younger adult life, part of my childhood in South Louisiana. And this is what I did. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Rwanda just before the war in Rwanda, or the genocide. And there was an HIV project there, because HIV, this is early days, remember this is 30 years ago when I was just finishing my master's and starting my career. HIV in Eastern Africa, the University of California, San Francisco was doing a research project because it was following the truck route between like Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi down. And HIV was being transmitted through, they discovered through prostitution at that time. And this was remember, this was new information at the time. Well, there was a team of very skilled physicians there in their research team. I happened to be in Kigali in Rwanda in the same area they were in, but they didn't have a writer. And so here I am, Peace Corps volunteer, teaching at the National University, and they're like, can you edit these grants we're doing, these federal grants? I'm like, sure, you know, you can't, you know. So they were super busy and they weren't writers. So I started editing and correcting and, you know, making the language flow and all this. I was like, oh, this is so interesting. I learned so much. Like a lot of you all, I'm a very curious person, and I learned so much about their project and what they wanted to do, and was able to edit it. And I was like, my goodness, this is a line of work that I was unaware of. So I actually learned to write grants in the Peace Corps in Africa. And, you know, things, you talk about a plot twist. Who would have expected that? And then I've worked as an English language instructor and as a community volunteer. And I've always drawn to the writing and the storytelling, so I started working on that. I worked in higher education at the University of Louisiana and Arkansas. And again, grant writing is a pretty normal part of the toolbox if you're working in higher ed, because lots of programs are grant ones. And that's true at Springwoods. Do you all have grants at Springwoods? I'm not sure. I mean, sometimes in healthcare, there's a lot, like UAMS, there's a lot of kind of what they call braided funding in state government, where some of it might be coming from federal or state grants. And then 10 years ago, I started writing grants. I've done contract grant writing, and then I've worked for a community clinic, Hope Cancer Resources, as a professional grant writer. And now I'm grant writing for the Ozark Literacy Council in addition to other duties. I've spent, some of you all are in the same position. My work has to have my passion behind it, and I think some of you all share that. I have to be engaged fully with the work that I'm doing. And so my work has always been, since I started my career, has always been access to healthcare and access to education. I come from Dunklin County, Missouri, a little town called Kennett, Missouri, which is in the Boot Heel. I didn't live there often. It's near Blytheville, Arkansas. I didn't live there often. My father was a career Marine. But I knew the disparities. There's no hospital in that county. And that's true in county. There are plenty of counties in Arkansas with no hospital at all. There's no hospital in that county. And education and healthcare disparities have just, created challenges for the people in that county. So I've always been really interested in what we can do to solve some of those challenges. So let me grab my little clicker and see where we're going here. And okay, we're going to talk for about 40 minutes about eligibility proposals, which is what we call these grant applications, basics, and positioning your organization. Then we'll take a little break, and then we'll finish the rest of it. And this is the second part of it is Foundation Center Database, which I've already given a shout out, and the reference desk. I love the reference librarians. Thank you, Kelly. Reference librarians are wonderful. When I'm stuck on a census detail or a literacy rate, or they can find the most interesting things. Those of you all, Nikita's a student at the university. I usually like to have at least one student at the university in my work network because they also have access to serious reference librarians with serious databases. So if anyone in your organization is connected to the university, if it's something you're struggling with, and you have someone who has access to their incredible resources, I would work with both. With both. So we'll talk about the types of proposals, the questions, and the attachments, and the importance of the attachments. And then I'll give you a little time for questions. So this is it. As I said earlier, planning is everything. Giving yourself enough time to find a grant. So don't be discouraged. You may not, the first year you're doing this, you may not get on the grant calendar. You may find out it's due next week. Or say, oh, look, here's a great grant, it's due next week. But you probably won't be able to turn in a solid application in a week. So get their calendar and start what's called a grants calendar, where you've got, and this might just be, mine's on my Google Calendar, right? It's just, or whatever you're using to plan your year, is you might start, AmeriCorps has a grant coming out. Their application's due in February, so in December you might put that on the calendar. So just as you're poking around, don't be discouraged and try. I also want to discourage you all from sending in slapdash applications, slapdash applications, particularly if it's a small or significant foundation in our region. You don't want to send in something messy fast, because you'd rather, make it very good and send it in later. Philanthropy and fundraising is a long game. It is. It's long. The organization I lead right now is 58 years old. I mean, that's remarkable. And there have been lots of ups and downs through that 58 years. But it is a long, long game. And so looking toward the future and not just this year's budget is important if that's your role. So planning is absolutely everything, as in so many things. Okay. Deadlines are firm. That's the thing that's different. With donors, you might be able to have conversations with them, but if there's a grant deadline at noon on Wednesday, it's noon on Wednesday, because they're almost all in portals now. How many of y'all have been in a grant portal yet and they look like everything else you do? But those portals, that's another reason why you want to turn them in the day before, because sometimes your password might not work, or the portal might be down. Or how many of y'all, even on Zoom, have y'all tried to get on an important Zoom meeting and find out that Zoom's updating? While at the same, that happened to all of us last year. So grant portals, so you're going to want to get in that portal and discover everything, but the deadlines are hard because the portal shuts down at that time. And so if they're due noon on Wednesday, turn it in Tuesday, make sure everything's turned in properly, and keep copies. We'll talk more about that. Typos are a big deal, just because all they've got, they don't have your story, they don't have your face, they don't have your clients in front of them. What they have is these documents. And so it being polished is important. If they're looking at 40 proposals, having a polished one is important, very important. And we'll talk about other things about that as well. The development process is identifying and defining your project, assessing your capabilities, gathering data, and finding funding sources. Unnamed client years ago brought in $1 million federal grant. It was one of the biggest ones I've ever brought in, and the client was furious with me when they had not taken seriously the amount of reporting that had to be done for that federal grant, they had to hire someone just to deal with the monthly reporting, because the grant had a lot of stringent reporting requirements. So assessing your capabilities is really important. There may be a big grant available in the kind of work that you do, but do you have the staffing? Do you have the reporting? Do you have the space to fulfill the grant? Because the thing you don't want to do is bring in a big grant and not be able to fulfill when you report on it a year later, if you haven't been able to do it. Now, I mean, during COVID, that got weird because some things you couldn't do because of things outside of all of our purview. But in terms of what you plan to do, make sure you have the capabilities and gathering data. And I'll probably say this again, but it's really important for every nonprofit to know who else is doing the work you're doing in your region. If we're talking about a geographic region, who else is doing the work you're doing in your region? I know who the other adult ed partners are, the other adult literacy partners are, and I actually know that there's no one formally doing that in Carroll or Madison County. I've been watching that for a long time. There are some projects through adult education, through the college in Harrison and some other things for adult literacy, but there's actually a gap there. And so in my world of literacy, knowing where those gaps are is really important. And so the same thing, I don't know, does Girls on the Run have anyone else who works in that space at all?
I mean, when it comes to the socio-emotional learning combined with the physical activity that we promote,
right.
I don't believe so.
I've never encountered it, but you would know more than I would, because that's that's your landscape. These are not competitors, folks. These are partners if they're working it. And there's a literacy project in Benton County, and we partner with them a lot. And but you need to know if someone else is doing, because if you present a grant and someone else is doing the same work in your area, in your same county or your same region, presents an identical proposal of this is what we want to do to fix it, that may maybe reduce the impact or the success rate of both of them. So the best thing to do is figure out if someone else is working in your world and make sure that you're talking to them before it happens. And you probably work together. So and finding the funding sources back to the library and doing that research, that's a really, really good place to start. Okay, I can't say this. I could just say this over and over for the next hour. Never find a grant never write your grant to fit a funder. Never look at a grant application and say, oh, I can squeeze this in. I used to laugh about trails. Trails, our bike trails are world renowned. I mean, we have incredible resources. And I still, to this day, we're very close. Several places that I've written grants for are close to bike trails. And if I'm talking about access, you can bet I always mention it because it's important. But I would not write a grant for a bike trail unless there was some way I could absolutely make it work. And that's an exaggerated example. But you all need to make sure that you're not looking at this $50,000 and thinking, ooh, we could probably do that, and then moving your mission to match that short-term money. It's a matching game. I have a very high success rate. Many professional grant writers do have high success rates with funding because I only write grants in a very narrow area there's a fairly good chance that will be funded. It's very expensive on your time as staff members to have people writing maybe grants. Now, if you have a full-time grant writer and they're going to write 30 or 40 a year, you can stretch a little bit and do the maybes, but you really need to start with the ones that narrowly match what you do. Super important. So don't write a grant to fit the funder. Find a funder that fits your project. That is the most important thing we'll talk about today, is making sure that is at least a good maybe before you present. And that's where that foundation directory, you spend so much time in that. For me, it might be looking up literacy in Arkansas, adult literacy, immigrants, refugees, I just narrow till I find people. Or it might be, I will search Oklahoma. I mean, heck, 90 miles away. But I know the foundations in the Tulsa area, and occasionally, we might reach out to them, but they're typically working in their own region. But that matching that you can do through Foundation Center is really, really helpful. You also can look at 990s to see, 990 tax returns, they'll tell you, they tell a great story. Your 990 should also tell a good story about the work that you're doing. But Foundation Center will tell you who an organization has funded in your field, in your area. Super important to know that. The other important thing, what else they'll tell you is how much they fund. Because you don't want to ask $75K if their average gift is $5, right? But you also don't want to ask for $5 if their average gift is $75. So if you can see they've given a series of $10,000 gifts, you're going to ask for $10,000 to $15,000, right? You're not going to ask for 100. And so that's the other really important thing that research will tell you.
It'll show you the average amount they fund for that specific search you did.
See, that's wonderful information, because don't you all agree that that's a hard thing to know how much to ask? And the same thing, we could have the whole same conversation about donors, about asking a donor for too much or too little. But we're focusing on grants here. Okay, writing the grant. Do you have the proper legal status? Yes.
I have a question about
Sure.
the range to ask for. Do you ever find that that's negotiable in any way, or do you kind of have to tailor it and know they'll come back to you with a number, and you have to live with that number?
That's a really good question. If you have a relationship with the grant funder, they will have conversations with you. And occasionally, a couple years ago, I wrote a grant for $100,000, and they funded $75,000, and that meant I had to revise the budget. That happens sometimes. It rarely goes over. They rarely say, "Oh, you asked for 100, we're giving you 125." I guess it could happen, but depending on the involvement of it's typically called a program advisor. There's big foundations have folks that work on area programs, and so that person might talk to you about that. But it is sort of negotiable in that they might still offer money, but perhaps reduce the award, and then you have to change the budget to match that, and perhaps your outcomes as well.
Do you feel like it's a little better to ask for that higher end?
Yes.
And let them come back? Okay.
Yes, I think. But as I said, not.
Potentially. Right?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's better to ask for full funding, and if they come back, see. And then also, you'll be showing. At some point, most of the opportunities, nobody wants to be 100% your program. No foundation, there's some risk to them funding everything you do, so they're going to want to know who else is funding. And they're going to, what are your other major sources of revenue and income? Because they don't want to get in a situation where you hire someone who's going to lose their position, or you start a program that's successful but not sustainable. The foundations, just as donors, this is not that different than donors. Donors want to give to an organization that is solid and steady and continue. They want to see the return on the beautiful work that you all are doing. So do you have proper legal status? 501c3? And for those of y'all in organizations like in healthcare, you need to, typically like the Fayetteville Public Schools has a foundation, the Fayetteville Public Education Foundation, and that's where grants are housed and received and typically, and perhaps written. It has a designation where it's a nonprofit that can, and this is complicated. The Fayetteville Public Library has a Fayetteville Public Library Foundation. I was very proud to serve on that board for a number of years, and they're the grant, I think all the grants go through the foundation, I expect, because
Our operating foundation that just funds us.
right.
But it's just interest on people that invested
Right.
eons ago.
So those are all, so you need to make sure that whoever you're representing, or if you're a new organization, that you've got that EIN, that 501c3 nonprofit, but that you have your tax number. And that takes a while if you're doing that. Now, for some organizations, it may not be a 501c3 if you're a combined organization. Human social services, these are the areas that you might work in, that you'll see typically as a selection. So you need to figure out because mine's always a little weird. Mine's human services, social services, education. And that's true. All of y'all are going to be hybrid, and you have to figure out what that is. And you'll see that with the grants. Faith-based organizations, have particular parameters. There may be opportunities for them, but there may also be some limitations. A lot of the bigger public foundations don't support specifically faith-based organizations, but it depends. You have to do that research. You have to do, and so funding is for interest in food distribution, child care, or other human services, so it might be human services. There are some foundations that do work directly with faith-based organizations. Again, just knowing who you're matching with. It's always knowing and you can find that out in Foundation Center. They typically don't fund individuals. Like, you can't really write a grant to an organization typically for a scholarship for a person. And they typically, it depends. So definitely not for buying a home, paying off debt, starting a business. Some grants can be for capital expenses, for buying a building, for improving a building, that sort of thing, but you have to make sure that they're available for those capital expenses. Okay, they're typically, most foundation grants are for programming, typically are related to programming, but occasionally you can find something for capital. Okay, tax-supported organizations, here's examples of these organizations all have foundations and receive grants, but it's through particular umbrella organizations. So if you're working with those, you need to know how you're, because say, perhaps the principal of a school could be involved in writing a grant, but they'd probably use their foundation 501c3 for the district to actually, which is eligible for the grant in a way that the elementary school may not be. Colleges and universities all have foundations that manage all of this. Public-private organizations, charter schools, school district education foundations, city arts foundations. These are all combos that may work together to get that tax number and that. Okay, this is really important. Nonprofits require finance, governance, and outreach. All are super important. So does your organization have a good governing board? If you're looking at some of the larger foundations, they're going to want to see that your nuts and bolts, your bones are in place. So do you have you probably have to send them the list of your board members, right? They're going to want to know about your board members. An important part of board members is they're going to want to know their terms of service. It's appropriate for a healthy governing board. There's a term of service, and people come onto they're elected to come onto the board, and they also go off of the board, right? Or can be reelected, but there's actually a process for all of that. It's very important that governance is in place. There's a lot of good information about governance in the Fayetteville Public Library's collection. Governance is really important. There's an organization called BoardSource, which I don't know if you all have access to BoardSource or not. No, but BoardSource has lots of good governing information for nonprofits, and it's incredibly important. And the thing I said earlier, who else in your community is doing similar work? I know who else is doing it in our region, working with adults. NTI does a lot of work with adult literacy, and I work with their director all of the time. That's NTI in Springdale. Do you have the collaborative relationships? Absolutely. We're all funded through Arkansas Adult Education, so I work with the other adult ed directors in our region all the time. And also, do you have the staff? If you get this big grant, do you have the staff and time to do a great job at it? It's not, and because the grant money is it's not just operating funds, general operating funds. It's typically for a particular project that you're doing, so you have to make sure that you can devote your time to that project. There are some general operating support grants available, but just like capital grants, they're rare. They're rare. It's mostly for proposals. And do you have the appropriate infrastructure to do the work? Do you have the right number of volunteers? Do you have the location? Do you have the technology? Whatever you need. An example in my own organization is we have 5 levels of adult English education, but as I said, we've had a lot of new adult learners who have very, very low literacy, and some of those online learning programs are not appropriate if you're just figuring out letters, or just figuring out. So we had to retool some of our resources for some of these new adult learners in our programs, and bulk up tutoring, because we do classes and tutoring, required more one-on-one tutoring to get those first, both. You want somebody in one-on-one tutoring and then also in class, which means required more humans. And so if Girls on the Run wanted to do more schools, that would require more humans, right? And so to run the programs, be the volunteers, and there's a whole process of getting involved. The other, for us, there are two other very important partners. These are examples. The Fayetteville Public Library, where I'm standing now, is a very important partner to us, because libraries and literacy, it's peanut butter and jelly. I mean, we just get along a lot. There's a lot of crossover of interest among our donors, interest among our services, our programs. And so because we want our learners to come in here, many of our learners who are from other countries are not familiar with, of course, I mean, this is an extraordinary library. This is an unusual library for any region. But they're not familiar with the free opportunities associated with the library. And so we spend time, and it's a trusted space, which is very important to our community. So we spend a lot of time. You all will have the same thing in your own. And single parent, you all probably have partnerships and conversations with all of the educational institutions, right? It's important. That conversation is super important, because one of the ways you can help your clients is by picking up the phone, right? Like helping, make something smoother. If you all have ever registered to be new at an institution for school or something, you know that it's not always simple. So can you spend the funds during the time? If it's a one-year grant, do you have the financial reporting? This is a really complicated part of it. If you have 5 or 6 grants, every dollar that you spend has to be charged off to that grant. All right, so if you get $100,000 and $10,000 of it's for technology and $50,000 for 3 people's salary, there's this spreadsheet of you, and your accountant can do it. You all can figure it out. However, your partners can figure it out, or your board, depending on the size. But you have to know that money has to be spent as you said it was going to be spent. And here's the maddening part of it: grants don't all come. Our fiscal year is July 1, so our state grants come in July 1, but our foundation grants come in September, December, January. So their 12 months may not match your fiscal 12 months. So we have to track the money among the grants and make sure we spend it all and make sure we spend it in the right bucket. This is something that favors larger organizations, not smaller organizations, because it's expensive to do that level of detail. It can be set up in QuickBooks. I've seen it. Or you could also perhaps talk to someone, or you might have a board resource that could do something like that to help you set it up. Once you're set up, it's pretty good, but you have to make sure, because there's reporting at the end, and you have to make sure that you're doing it correctly. What's the impact on your infrastructure? There was a time when, and I'm going to use Canopy, who's one of our most important partners. They've gotten to a much larger building, which they needed, but they were our neighbor across the street, just off Sunbridge, for a long time, and we let them use, as their staff was getting bigger and bigger and bigger to work with refugee resettlement, we were letting them use our building for staff meetings and stuff, because we had a bigger gathering space, and it made sense. Now they're in a much larger building, but you have to make sure. That's a good example of needing infrastructure during growth. So you have to make sure, if you're, a lot of nonprofits, if you're doing it out of your garage or your living room or something, then you hire 3 more people, that may not work. You may need to find a community space to do that. And also the infrastructure, do you have the payroll? We always, audit is one of our biggest expenses. Our accountant knows this. This is one of our biggest expenses of the year. But an audit is really important as you get to a certain size, because we do an annual audit, because a lot of the larger foundations want to see that audit. They want to see your 990, they want to see your audit. If you're a very small organization, they may take a financial statement, but for larger organizations, and an audit is expensive. It's an expensive thing to do, and that's the business system. So can you get those financial reports? Can you get monthly financial reports on what you spent down? Our state grants require monthly reporting, but most foundation grants will come back to you at the end of 12 months or 18 months and say, how did you spend the money? And you don't have the time to go back, track that money. You should have been tracking it all along, or realize you haven't spent $10,000 of it, because then you have to figure out how to spend $10,000 in a week. And that's not, that's not good. So it's better to know the whole time. It's better for cash flow. But it can be, it's a high wire act. Running a nonprofit, for those of y'all who run nonprofits, it's a high wire act because the money comes in and out and in and out and it changes, and you're trying to keep everything going through that. Does that make sense? Do y'all have any questions so far? Well, I'll make time for questions.
What happens if you have 10,000 left and you don't spend it?
Well, I'm of the rigorous honesty policy. If that would happen, I would have the minute I identified it, I would have called the program advisor to the foundation and say, this is what's happened. Sometimes they will ask that you return it. A lot of times, if you can say, this is what happened and this is why we didn't spend the money and we anticipated spending it a year and a half ago, they'll let you make an adjustment. This happened to lots of nonprofits during the pandemic, lots and lots, because we had set out certain guidelines, and everybody's projected outcomes on their grants changed because we weren't together in the same way. And I think it's very important when you may know before the last minute that it's not. It is not my policy to wait to tell them. If I think, and they don't want you to, because they want you to succeed. These foundations want you to succeed. That's why they've invested in you. So tell them when you know, work with them to resolve the problem. That is such a good question, because it's so important. And transparency will help you during the life of your career, and it will also help that will allow your nonprofit to be seen as a trusted partner, which is very important. So much of this, just like in fundraising, is reputational. That's an investment, and they want to know that they're making a good investment. Yes?
I've talked to two foundations recently that said they're moving to trust-based grant making, and they're saying we don't need to track things, but also making me a little nervous.
Well, you're going to want to track certain things that are important to you. But yes, we have some we have leading foundations in our region, and it's extraordinary that we're in Northwest Arkansas. It is, because the level of support we have for philanthropy and among foundations is extraordinary. And so they lead thought a lot on changes in the way foundations fund, and several of them are going to less onerous reporting, right? Less difficult reporting. Or reporting it on. But at the same time, you probably want to identify whatever you want to report on for the larger story. So we report on things, we know we have gender, ethnicity, region of origin, number of volunteers, number of volunteer hours. Those are things that I want to know regardless of whether they're within the grant. That is such a good question. That's so interesting. That's new, isn't it, to see that? But it's because they're recognizing that grant reporting can make it more difficult to fulfill the mission in lots of circumstances. So that's really interesting. I've been doing this work long enough to know that metrics were incredibly important. There was at one point where everything shifted to just metrics, and now it's shifting back to more of a mix. So types of applications, there's lots of them. And when you get experience at this, you'll say, oh my goodness, look at this. It's 8 questions and 1 day's work instead of the week-long work. This is something, there's typically, the formal word for it is letter of intent. There's typically, some foundations don't have just open applications on a website. Several that are here in our region. And so you have to have a conversation with them. They have to get interested in you. And then you might provide a 1 or 2 page letter of intent. Just an outline of what you want to do. They don't want to waste your time having you write a full proposal. So that's just give me let's see your idea. Let's see your idea, and let's see and then we'll talk later about it. And so that's an intent form, and they usually, this is different from organization to organization. They may send you a short form just to fill it out, or you may just write a letter of inquiry or intent. Same thing. And describing the organization, what you're seeking funding for. If the funder likes, then they'll go forward. And typically you'd put a number, not a firm number, but you'd say generally we're asking for $125,000 or whatever we're asking for, and then you would talk about the program in a page or 2, not more than that, all right? Just a page or 2, unless they ask for more. And sometimes they'll say 3 or 4 pages. Then there's a proposal, and the proposal is typically, it says like here I've got proposal and online application forms. We're shifted to the point where almost everybody's working in online grant. Is anybody still writing paper proposals? I have one funder. You still have a handful? We have 1 or 2 local funders that still want a paper proposal that they might share with their quarterly board members.
Well, it's not in a portal, but it is electronically submitted.
That's it. You're right. That's important. Yes, we're not mailing them. We're attaching a PDF, yes, right, to and that happens. But I've found that in the past decade, almost every granting organization is using a portal now. It might be cyber grants. It might be there's a ton of them. They all run pretty similarly. You should absolutely have a password keeper and never lose your password. Have an effective password keeper. Have a password pattern, because this is the kind of thing that can happen when you're getting ready to turn in. Your password has changed, or you've changed computers and you don't have that password same. Because how many of y'all depend on your computers to keep that password up? You know, we all love that. But you may have to, like if it's cyber grants or whatever they're calling themselves, it may take 24 hours for you to get the password reset. You may not have 24 hours. So again, back to that never last day business on that sort of thing. So you may be attached, you may be sending something electronic in a PDF format. More likely you'll be in a grant portal. The good news is the grant portals all work pretty similarly. So you'll be able to do that. And I probably have said this somewhere else, but here is the most important lesson that I've learned the hard way over the course of my career is don't write in the portal. Do not write in the portal, okay? This is the same way when you are doing Common App for college or something. Do not write in the portal. What do you write in? Word or whatever, Google, whatever you're using to process language, you write in there and you move it into the portal. And so you always have this copy that you have in whatever your document processor is. It's Google Word, whatever. The other thing is I find that Word, I use both Google and Word, but they'll prompt corrections, right? Anybody? And I love prompted corrections. Or a bigger thing, when we first started, really, most of the online portals have character counts. So they might say 2,000 words or 2,000 characters. I am old enough, I'll say this publicly, to still double space after sentences. Because when I learned to type 1,000 years ago, we were instructed to double space after sentences. I understand, my grown children find this laughable, but it is a very hard habit to break. Is it not, Kelly? It's, and it's like, it's just, you can say, oh, there's a double spacer right there. It's like it looks odd now in our electronic communication. But that used to matter because I might have a 2,000 character count, and if I was wasting space in that way, I had to go back through in Word and make sure that I wasn't doing that. That's a silly example, but important. The other thing you might say, we're going to do this in order to, that if you've got a 2,000, there's a lot of editing that can happen that gets you down to that character count. You need to pay attention if it's a character count or a word count, because some are word-based and some are character-based. And these are things that you just get experience by doing them. But do not ever write in the portal. Always have another copy. And it may be that you've got multiple people working on it in a Google Doc or something and people are editing together. Then at that point, somebody needs to draw down the final copy, and you need to have a final copy that's editable, because what if you want to apply next year? You don't want to have to, you want to make sure you have an editable copy, or some grants are fairly similar. On the grants, I use the same there's a sustainability question about the sustainability of your organization. I use similar content on all the grants because the sustainability of our organization doesn't change from application to application. There may be an emphasis that changes, but that doesn't change. The history of our organization doesn't change from application to application. So I actually keep what I call chunks. That's just patty word. I keep chunks in a separate doc so I can lift those chunks and use them. And then I'll tailor them to where if it's, for example, if I'm writing to a foundation in Northwest Arkansas, I don't really need to explain Northwest Arkansas. But if I'm writing to a national foundation, we live in the Ozarks in Arkansas, and sometimes some of the national organizations don't understand that there are 600,000 people in our region, right? That's unfamiliar to them. And so I will have another chunk where I present the organization within the context of national literacy and not just regional literacy, where it would be inappropriate to explain who the corporate partners or whoever's in Northwest Arkansas to someone who's in Northwest Arkansas, because we're all in the traffic, we understand. And so the application form, the online application forms, and that's what you do, as long as you promise me you will always keep an outside copy. So that's it, cut and paste. So you'll have the pieces saved. They don't have text editors, another reason not to write in them. The online applications typically don't even have spell check. So you've got to do all that somewhere else and then dump it in there. And make sure, I did a few years ago, I just turned in one with an empty block of text. I just missed answering one of the questions. I was actually in tears. It upset me so much because, first time for everything, but I was like, I can't believe this. I just gathered up my courage and I emailed the program officer and I said, I just submitted this is what's happened, here's the text. And the program officer said, no problem. I mean, we'll just, this particular set of circumstances. Now, if I ask them 6 more times, probably not. But, I used up my gimme and we're good. And they were okay within their own governance policies to add that text, to add that piece that I missed. Still gives me heartburn to think about it. Text editors. How are we doing on time? We're doing great. Save everything. Save everything. Save everything. If you're working in Google, you're in better shape. But whatever you're working in, please save everything. The other thing is you want to save it in a way that you can reuse it. Some people, I was talking about this just before this is not in the presentation, but I was talking about this before we started. We have a case for support. We have a document that kind of talks about what we're going to do at the Literacy Council for the next 24 months, what our programs are, how we expect to expand this, how we're responding to geopolitics and changes. And that case for support gives our argument for everything we're doing. This is a really good investment. And it may be that you require to hire someone to help you do that. It also gives all the data, current data, on the statistics about literacy in our region or nationally. And that's really, really important. So we've got this one document. I also share it with the board because it's a great way for board members to get up to speed on your strategy, on what the strategy is and what the plans are in the upcoming. Again, I used to do 5-year plans. I tried to do that last year and it was making me insane. So we did a 24-month plan. Because anybody who knows, we don't know. 5 years, it seems like a lot of change right now. 24 months, I felt like I could wrap my head around. So we have a sort of a looser, long plan. But that case for support, that argument for why you exist is really an important building block for all of these other things. And please save everything. And save everything. I'm obsessed with that. And I'd put it in, we use Drive, but I would put it up in the cloud so you can get it other places as well. And I want you all to take just a minute, and you can do it on your phone or just in your head or on a piece of paper. Talk about if you're going to ask for money right now. If I said, for attending, you've all got $25K just for being here, what would you ask for right now? So just think about what you might ask for. And I'll just give you a couple minutes to do that. Where'd I put my water? There it is. Okay. Okay, so you'll have a couple of minutes just to work on that. I don't expect you to fully flesh it out. But did you know what you would ask for? So, and that's a really important thing to do for a couple of reasons. You have to be real clear on what you want to do before you can do it. The other thing is sometimes unexpected. I'm going to sit down, y'all. My toes driving me crazy. The other thing is sometimes unexpectedly and wonderfully, a donor, not so much a foundation, but a donor may go, "What do you need?" And you can't. You got to just say what you need and come up, and say, we're seeking $10,000 to provide, supplies for X or whatever. We're seeking $10,000 to support the work that we do. So always have that in hand. And now that we're out in public a lot, we're seeing that more. But always ask, but always have a thought about looking at next year's budget. What do we really need? And then be kind of patrolling for grant and foundation opportunities there. Okay, we seek grants from foundations, corporations, government, and as I said, the Fayetteville Public Library will help you with resources. We have large foundations here, the Walmart Foundation, which is separate from the Walton Family Foundation. The Walmart Foundation has some public. They have some, you can get on to the Walmart Foundation and see some of their applications. Walton Family Foundation is invitation only. They don't have a public-facing grant portal. Tyson Foods also, most corporations have some sort of giving opportunities, large or small. Some of you all may work with national vendors and they may have some giving opportunities as well. And I'd say particularly horses or running, there are some kind of, it's not really a grant, but there's some product opportunities associated with certain kinds of work, right? And we're fortunate to live in an area with lots and lots of opportunities to receive product, because so many of the corporations of the world, the vendors are here because they're here because of the large impact of our corporations. So that's who you seek grants from, and the types of funding. It'll say the type of funding they're interested in. So look at what their interest is. We talked about that earlier. It's a matching game. If they don't fund literacy, if their passion is medical something, I'm not going to write a literacy grant to them unless it's health literacy. And we did so much of that work during COVID. A lot of our adult learners didn't understand that they were eligible for vaccinations because they were perhaps a visitor or not a citizen yet. And the early days of vaccination, they didn't understand that everyone was eligible. And so we actually did some work toward that with our own clients. So there's sometimes you think, oh, it's a medical organization, but maybe you do have some sort of tie to them. So never discount, but always look closely. And knowing what other organizations they funded is huge. And Foundation Center will give you that information. Program development, that means program delivery, operating, capacity building, seed money, and startup funding. These are the important kind of big chunks to know. Program development is whatever you're doing, the programs you're working on. Operating can be a little hard to get. A lot of times grants will allow you 10 or 15% operating cost, but there are grants now with just general operating costs, which just lets you operate without delivering it through the structure of a program. It's wonderful. Capacity building, that's for a new program that you want to do. You want to expand your capacity. And seed money or startup funding is funding for a new agency, sometimes for an existing agency for a brand new program. In other words, we're going to do this. Can you help us get this started? And they'll say yes, and how else are you going to fund it? And so those are different types. Your capacity is lots of things: human capital, finance, physical space, all of that plays into your capacity. Equipment and technology, there are occasional grants that are just for equipment and technology. There were a number of them during COVID because we were trying to get internet access. You all saw that, that exposed this terrible gap in internet access. And there were a number of grants. In literacy, there were a lot of grants for Chromebooks, internet access, hotspots, all of that, because the learning had stopped because people had those barriers. Technical assistance, don't discount those. Technical assistance is hiring a governance consultant to help you improve your bylaws. We actually did that 5 years ago. One of the local foundations had an opportunity to meet with a board source consultant And the board source consultant actually rewrote our bylaws. Didn't rewrite them, made major suggestions, and the board was able to update the bylaws based on that and just look at kind of our risk and assessment, and we never would have been able to afford board source consultant. So those kind of technical assistance things are wonderful. Capital campaigns, a separate thing. If you're saving up, it's typically a building. It could be other things. The Fayetteville Public Library is still in a capital campaign right now to complete the payment of this gorgeous building. The Fayetteville Public Library Foundation, I should say. Building renovation, endowment fund. We have a modest endowment. Does anybody else have an endowment within their organization? I know you all do. And endowment, there is some fundraising directly to the endowment. Remember, an endowment is something that builds over time. And we have one that was established, Barbara Broyles, who was a community member, and the wife of, she's passed away, as is her husband was Frank Broyles, who's an important figure in Arkansas and in Arkansas athletics. And Barbara Broyles' passion was Ozark Literacy Council, and she quietly served as a volunteer, a leader, a tutor for over 20 years. Our endowment is named for her service. We also have an annual event called the Champions of Literacy. It's named for our great champion, Barbara Broyles. And so that endowment, but the endowment's with the Arkansas Community Foundation. It was established close to 20 years ago. It's doubled. It's modest, but it's doubled. And we just take some interest off of it every year. And knowing the size of the endowment is helpful too. That may not be, that's something that helps show some stability over the organization. And there are a number of nonprofits that have largish endowments, and then there are others who have modest, but it provides. We own our building. Our building was built by the Baum Foundation 20 years ago. This is a huge thing for a nonprofit. We own our building outright, and that some of the money from the Broyles endowment helps us maintain this lovely building just off Township on Sunbridge. So these are all the different kinds of things you can ask for. Writing the proposal, identify the first thing is just look it over, read everything, read it again, read the questions, folks, read the questions, and know what the due dates are. Know what the due dates are. And that means the due dates for your partners as well. The major components, there may be a title page, the legal name. If you all don't operate under your legal name, you need to make sure that you provide both. Whoever's going to run the project, and important grant writer tip, if you're having a staff member run the project, make sure that you've discussed it thoroughly with them before you propose work for them. And this happens more often than you'd think, but make sure that happens. It has to have a title. I like fun titles, compelling, not fun. I like compelling titles for the projects and that talk about what you're doing. Start and end dates. Amount secured from other sources. They want to know who else has got skin in the game for this. And then your summary is summarizing the outcomes, the problem, the methods, and the numbers, and perhaps a short description of your agency. There's almost always a summary. Purpose and need statement. This can be long. What are you asking for? Strategies and methods, describing your work, maybe a timeline. Some funders has anybody ever had to work on a logic model? Oh, okay. So some funders, that's sort of its own beast, and but there are examples available. I'm finding fewer requests for logic models. There was a lot of them just a few years ago, but they're still going to want to know outcomes and outputs. Yes?
Do they call it logic model, or is it something that maybe in the overview, like it'll be described a certain way and you kind of like stumble into a logic model?
Both. Okay. Yeah, you kind of, you end up, you sort of have to have one, but for a long time, a lot of the portals had these like fill in this logic model, and it can be kind of a beast. You have outputs and outcomes, what you're going to do, what's going to change because of it, how you're going to evaluate. For us in adult literacy, we use TABE Class E, which is a examinations, pre and post test. We pre and post test our students, so that's our evaluation. You all may do it in different ways. It may be softer than that. It may be harder than, it may be soft data, or it may be soft information or hard data. Qualifications and personnel. A lot of times they'll want short biographies of who's working on the project. You should always kind of have those of your folks. Know what they do, sometimes a 2 or 3 sentence bio, sometimes longer. And you have to have a budget. And the budget is typically a little graph where you set up a proposed budget. And there'll typically be a piece of overhead on there, which you can just put 10 to 15%. And then they might have you're going to spend some on personnel, you're going to provide some equipment. Some grantors want really detailed budgets, some just want a general idea of the first round, and then they come back with you with a detailed budget. And sustainability. What is the sustainability of your organization? What is the and sustainability is the mix of funding, for sure, and it's also the how you all have maintained over years or over decades. Because there's a lot of risk to any new business or to small business, and businesses change sometimes. Like I said, it's pretty extraordinary that I lead a 58-year-old organization. United Way's older than that, but there are only a handful of nonprofits in Northwest Arkansas that have that age of them. And a single parent is 30, I think, right? 30-ish?
I think so.
I think it's around 30. So that's an important bit of information, sustainability. Attachments are such a big deal. EIN number, tax number, federal tax, do y'all have your federal tax exemption letter? The letter saying you're a 501c3 or whatever. Just have it, just keep it up there in the cloud. You're going to use it over and over again. A lot of times they'll want your articles of incorporation, so you should always have a PDF of that in several places. They might want your bylaws. I mean, they're looking at you all about risk, and so they want to know all this. An audit and or a 990, a list of your board members. I always provide if it's a corporate board member or a community member, we usually put their title on the, I have one that's just like name, title, and function on the board. And then their terms. I always have their terms on there too. If it's like first term, second term, we have 3-year terms. The agency budget, almost all of them want to know the budget of your organization, as well as, it's not the same as the program budget. So if your budget is $500,000 for your organization, and you might be asking for $75,000. And so they're going to want to see both. And they may want a staff list with job titles, just depends. Attachments are and the nice thing about attachments, you just keep them somewhere in the cloud and use them over and over again. Start collecting, this is demographic information. If you make sure that you have demographic information of your area, and you don't want to waste time trying to figure out the demographics because you're going to use them over and over again. Again, this would be well accomplished neatly in a case for support, because then you'd have it for a couple of years, but make sure you have that demographic information. The other thing, a case for support, because Katie and I were just talking about that the other day, is a case for support can also lead into your annual report, because that kind of gives the current language, and it can all kind of work together. You can, in fact, at our recent Champions of Literacy event, of which Jacob Arnold, our board member, was the MC, he used language from the case for support in his introduction, because it talked a lot about our work. And he just went to that and pulled some things out as part of his introduction, so that was really handy. Tracking the grant, we talked about that, about making sure you know which grant, what the money is. So I have rushed through all of this to the end somehow, and I was hoping that about 50, because are we done at 11:30? Okay, that's good. So I'm timing perfect. I think I thought I was going to schedule a break in, but then I just blew right through everything. But this is perfect timing, so I'm here to answer questions. Yes?
How important do foundations look at your website?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
We all agree there, right? They look at
Updated is just a natural thing to.
Having your website and storytelling part of it is super important, because if your website hasn't been touched in 3 years, that tells a story too. But they absolutely look at your website, absolutely. We're actually adding to ours, we're adding the audit and the 990. I think single parent probably has theirs, if anybody else has. We're adding more of our financial tracking. We haven't, but I think it's really important that you are really super transparent about that. We also kind of follow the GuideStar guidelines. So that's a good question. What other questions do we have? Yes?
Do you have a way that we can make a copy of what you...
Kelly does.
Yeah, I have the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
I can just email it out. You registered, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
I can just email it out to everyone. Did you all register with your email address?
Yeah. What other questions do you have?
What do we know about the Walton's new family, whatever that they're building in Bentonville?
Are you talking about the medical school?
No, I don't think I am. The one that's downtown, I've been told, is going to be their center for their family outreach.
I don't know. I don't have any information about that.
Oh. It's right next to the Literacy Council.
Yeah.
You know, the big building that's got the catwalk across.
Yeah, no, I don't have any information about that, but there are so many Walton-related wonderful projects in Northwest Arkansas. I do know they're building a medical school, you know, near Crystal Bridges.
That's on Crystal Ridges.
Yeah, it's on the Crystal Bridges property, and they're actually opening a brand new allopathic, you know, medical school in just a few years. So they're always, it is, I would say in a general way, it is important to know what's going on in your region. I talked about bike paths earlier, when bikes, you know, and I actually do use that in access to transportation because we're just off the trail, because we're just off Gregg Street. And so many of our volunteers, our AmeriCorps members, our adult learners use the trail. They bike for sure, because we're not just, you know, not that far from the university. The red bus route also stops. So most of our students arrive on the buses, which I understand that doesn't help us in Madison or Carroll County, but in Fayetteville, we have a pretty robust bus system, because many of our adult learners have not been able to get a driver's license yet because they're working on speaking English. So transportation is a huge barrier for lots of nonprofits, and so talking about transportation, bus routes, bike routes, and things are actually really important when I'm talking about our work. What other questions do you have? Yes?
I'm trying to think of the word, where you get the budget to help with just the personnel and different things like that, but you have a hard time finding. You said that there are grants now that will focus just on that.
Operating funds, on just like general operating funds. I think you start again with the Libraries Foundation database and see. Will it say operating fund? Will it talk about type of grant in the search?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that's in the search, so you could look for that capital operating program.
As you get into this library, the funding, how do you do that? Okay.
Kelly.
Yeah, I've got business card back here. I need to figure out time.
You still have to do it within the building, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's always been that way. It's fine.
You have to do the research here.
Yeah, and I've for years been down here once a month or so, depending on the grant season, what I'm working on. I come down here and I see lots of other grant professionals, because I don't know what the database costs, but it's more than we want to spend just for our organization. So I just come in here and just pull it. And like I said, that's how I know I can email everything to myself. Because once you know what you're looking for, you can just kind of dig and then just email it back to yourself and finish the work in your own workspace. What other questions? Yes?
So when you're thinking about diversity of funding, but then, you know, potentially applying for grants to fund a program, but you don't know if they're coming through.
Oh, that's so hard.
Balancing how much you ask for from each. Like, do you have any just tips or suggestions?
That is really, it's a little bit of, you know, kind of fortune telling. You're not sure, but that is a really tricky part of it, is if you've got a proposal out for something, you're not sure if it's going to come through, and then the other one sort of depends on it. And I think that the calendar, like knowing cold when everything is funded, like it's going to be funded, you know, February through January the following year, knowing what your income stream funding is, and then sometimes you may end up with more funding for one program than you'd expected. So if you receive a second funding source, that's when I absolutely go to the program advisor. I just work with them. They really do, the program advisors for these foundations really do want to provide support. They're not trying to trip us up, they're trying to provide support. And so being honest with them and saying, how can we, now don't just ask them what to do, say, this has happened, can we move that funding to this? That's the thing, is come in with a proposal. And that's about the best I can say, knowing when everything's going to come through. And even then, it's always a little too exciting as you're waiting for it all to come together. I promise you that it never gets less exciting. Sure.
So when you're doing things like that and you are trying to fund like a program position, do you like split up the percentage of, you know, the personnel costs?
Yes.
Among the grants?
Yes. Absolutely, it might be 30, 20, 20. I would say I have a couple of our larger foundations. They absolutely want some of the executive director's salary in the grant. They want skin in the game, as you would say. They want to know that's. But yes, you split them up, and then that's another spreadsheet that you can have where you can see how people's salary are divided. I think it's very important as a it's true in business, but in nonprofit, if someone is grant funded, and this is real typical in a university environment, but if someone is grant funded, when you hire them, they need to know that the funds for their position are coming from this. It's very important to let people know that they're employed through the supportive grants, because those things change. And it's helpful if people know that.
This is something I don't have to deal with at single parent, which I'm very glad about, but can you talk a little bit about the differences between just grant funding and reimbursable grant funding?
Like monthly expenditure, where you have to report back on it?
And then
yes.
they refund you that money?
Yes.
Which is not something that's very exciting to do.
No. We do that. We do that. It's with our state grants. It's a monthly.
That's what the Boys and Girls Club. I work for the Boys and Girls Club.
That's a state. Sometimes you'll have to do a monthly expenditure report, and then they'll send you that favors slightly larger organizations, because this is a cash flow issue. For sometimes it can be a cash flow issue. So you do have to do, and it's very important to reduce the risk to your organization, that if they want a monthly expenditure by the 10th of the month, you turn it in every month. And I always laugh and say, I think the success, we've had, I've been at the Circular City Council for 5 years, and we've had enormous success. We've doubled the size of our budget and had some and really clarified our mission, and it's been just a great honor and a joy to do the work. But I say, when people say, what are you doing? It's like, we do our work and we turn it in on time. That's it. We do our work and we turn it in on time. And but you also have, in a position like mine, you have major gifts, which is pursuing people who might provide major gifts, typically unrestricted. You also have grants. You also have fundraising. I have a lot of support, Katie Serio, on that messaging part of it. But there's all these different parts of it, and that for a small organization usually falls on one person's shoulders. Even if you have a development officer, the development work is never separated from the executive director, because the messaging is there. It's just never, ever. So kind of knowing cash flow, I think it's important to try to build some sort of some sort of extra, a little money tucked away, rainy day money, whatever you want to call it. But it's not always possible. So
that's what happened with the Boys and Girls Club. That we received a large reimbursable grant, but they expected us to spend the money, but the money didn't always come in. And so then you're like, well, great, we haven't gotten the money, but it's funding staffing. And so we had to have a nest egg of additional support to cover that, or you tell people you can't pay them. So
we also have a line of credit on our building that we haven't had to use, but it's for that kind of reason, because cash flow can go, can be. So that's a really good question. But I've only found that monthly expenditure, I've only found that in federal and state grants. I've never seen that in a foundation. Foundations usually, and a lot of times the foundation, if you're approved, they'll send you the check, right? And you have the check. It might be $75,000 for 18 months. But then you have to be really careful that that money is going as appropriated, because you are, even if you're with your organization only for a few years, you are building the reputation of the future of that organization. And so doing the work, turning it in, doing it correctly, being honest, helps that organization thrive over decades. I think that's one of the things that most delights me about our Champions of Literacy event, is it's named for Barbara Broyles. She had no idea that in 2022 we're having this giant party, basically, with 250 people celebrating the work that she did very quietly, without any public accolade, for 20 years. We have, she helped us get a bill. I mean, that's extraordinary philanthropy. And just doing the work, but also setting up the endowment, making sure we had a building. She set the organization on the road to success. But she is not alive to see that. She was doing work for the future and doing good work, and that's what philanthropy in a lot of ways is setting us up. It's not just for this year, and it's hard to think of it that way, because we've got the desperate circumstances of every year. What other questions do you have? Yes?
How important is our GuideStar platform to Foundation?
You know,
Look at those levels.
what do you think about GuideStar Platinum Gold? Does anybody else work on that for their organization? We stay in GuideStar and try to keep it updated. I don't know how important. I don't know. I'm maybe not the best, but I'm also working. We keep it updated, but I also think that even foundation giving a lot of times is relationships, and so building a good relationship is most important. But I wouldn't let anything like that go, untended. I'd make sure that we had a presence on it. The same for some of you all might receive some of your funding through third party like Benevity. I think Tyson uses Benevity, Walmart uses their own platform. Make sure that you're up to date in those platforms so the money can come to you all electronically.
So I will say, I actually loved putting that little logo.
Yeah,
That's personal, I did that. But it also did force us to actually start to category the process and things that people affected, the number over the years. And if you just look at it as a personal gauge for our organization, it's kind of encouraging.
It does do.
Or it can push you towards a goal.
It does do that.
I hadn't been forced to do that before GuideStar.
And that's, it's wonderful.
But knowing whether or not someone else is looking at it, that helps me. I don't know.
I think the fact that you're using it as a tool means it helps. To me, that's a great, and if you can capture that, and you can also refer to people to it. It's been a long time since I've had a conversation with a program advisor who has not looked at our website. We also Katie does a wonderful short annual report, colorful, 8-page. We print it. And I have a really decent PDF copy. And if you've ever gotten an email from me, you probably saw the annual report, because I attach it to everything all year long and put our website on my email tag. But I use that annual report over and over again because it tells our story and in a brief way, and it's lovely. And it has great images and shows that, because the pictures are just wonderful and a wonderful way to tell the story. So having a short annual report, which can, like I said, align with that case for support, can allow you to just communicate that. It also looks responsible. Here's our annual report. It looks like we've been doing this and we're gathering this information and we're sharing it with you. So, what other questions? These are such good questions. We have 1 minute left.
How could you get involved with the Grant Professionals Association?
Oh, that's such a good question. There is a website. Melanie Palmer is a professional grant writer. For years, Cheryl Kester, who's from the Fayetteville area, has been a contract grant writer for a couple of decades. She worked with Melanie Palmer. Cheryl's doing some other projects now, including grant writing. But there's a grant professional, a professional grant writer. There's a number in the region, but Melanie Palmer, who is available occasionally to actually do contract work for people, but she's also very involved in the Grant Professionals Association. And I would say look at their website, and there's an Arkansas chapter. We don't meet a lot, but we share a lot of information. There aren't a ton of professional grant writers in our region. There are more in capital cities, if that makes sense, right? Federal, state, medical centers. But there are some professional grant writers. It's a fascinating line of work, and you just need to get like any other small business, you just have to get the experience and the contacts. It has helped me as an executive director shape our vision, because when you have to write about it, you have to understand it. And if you understand at that level, then it's easier for you to explain, and it's also helps you tell the board or tell whoever you're working with what's going to happen. Well, this money's here and this money's here, so it's great storytelling. That's a good question. So Grant Professionals Association. I'm also a member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. For those of y'all who are in nonprofit, I absolutely love AFP. It's called AFP. They also have a job board, AFP NWA. They have a chapter job center. So if you look at AFP NWA, if you know people who are in nonprofit, that they usually have job postings that you may not find elsewhere, and it's publicly available. But Association of Fundraising Professionals is not about grants. Grants are part of the toolbox, but it's more about people who are raising money. I do both, and so I find it really helpful to have contacts in this. And some of the people we've talked about, that's how I know Tyler Clark, who's the leader of Single Parent. We've worked together, but also because he's been involved in Association of Fundraising Professionals. And we're hope to be meeting in person again next year, I guess. So.
Well, we had the summit.
That's right, and I wasn't able to be there, sadly. Our board chair went, which is wonderful. But yes, so we're starting to do more in-person things. And events absolutely have a place. In your. But look, if you look at the research, you'll see that events are a good fundraising, but they're not the ROI. Because if you've done an event, you know how much time you spend on the event, getting to that. Remember, that's staff time. See, tick, tick, tick. So that staff time reduces the impact of the giving. And most events are actually, the money is in sponsorship, not in tickets typically, right? The money's in sponsorship. So that's good to know too. That was a little off topic. 30 more seconds. Anybody else? You all, it has been such a pleasure. I can't believe I've talked to you for an hour and a half without any kind of a break. It's been really interesting. It's so much fun. This is hard work, folks, and it's, you know, being a nonprofit can be have lots of challenges, but it's wonderful, wonderful to spend your time achieving change and helping folks in our community. So you see my personal emails on there. You're always welcome to I'll take questions or connect you if there's someone that I know. It's also really important to use your board and your other friends to connect with people in similar work. And also great to get partners for grants, because they do love to see partnerships within grants. They love to see organizations working together. And that's everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you.